She told me to lower my voice. I whispered back, then raise your heartbeat. The first day he noticed her wasn't anything dramatic, no cinematic entrance, no grand gesture. The classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and old books, the kind of scent that made him feel both nostalgic and slightly restless. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the golden light. He was just another student, notebooks open, pen poised, when she stepped in. She moved with a quiet confidence, her posture straight but unforced, the kind of grace that made people instinctively take notice. Her hair, streaked with subtle silver strands, caught the sunlight as she shifted, and he found himself staring longer than he intended. She was attractive in a way that didn't scream for attention. It was the kind of presence that filled a room without needing to. And she was older, not in a way that felt intimidating, but in a way that carried experience, patience, and unspoken strength. As she spoke, her voice was clear, calm, and unexpectedly warm, cutting through the ambient noise of restless students. He noticed how her hands moved with gentle precision, the delicate gestures emphasizing points without ever seeming forced. When she passed back his first assignment, her fingers brushed his knuckles, just enough to linger, enough to make him acutely aware of the quickening of his pulse. He looked down at the paper, trying to hide it, but he couldn't ignore the faint electricity that tingled along his skin where her touch had grazed him. The brief interaction left him both flustered and intrigued. There was something disarming about the way she carried herself. Her confidence never felt like arrogance, and her gaze, though discerning, wasn't judgmental. He found himself noticing details others might miss: the subtle curve of her smile when she corrected a student gently, the quiet way she adjusted her scarf as she leaned over a desk, and the small crease between her brows when she concentrated. Every detail anchored him to the moment, making the air around her feel heavier with potential. Even her presence in the room shifted the ordinary rhythm of the day. The hum of fluorescent lights, the scratch of pens on paper, the occasional cough from the back of the class, all of it seemed to fade around her. His thoughts, normally scattered, aligned in a strange focus. He wanted to understand her, to be noticed in return, yet feared crossing a line he wasn't sure even existed. And yet there was a spark, a subtle, unspoken curiosity that threaded between them. She glanced at him once, perhaps noticing his distracted stare, and for a fleeting second, their eyes met. It wasn't a look that demanded anything, but it acknowledged something, a silent awareness of each other, like two strangers recognizing a shared secret. His chest tightened slightly, a flutter that made him acutely aware of his own heartbeat. By the time class ended, he knew something had shifted. The room returned to its normal cadence, students packing their bags and whispering about trivial matters, but he lingered, reluctant to break the thread of connection he felt. The encounter was small, almost imperceptible, yet it planted a seed, a quiet fascination, a curiosity that refused to fade. In that ordinary classroom, with sunlight scattering across the desks, he realized that for the first time in a long while, he was paying attention in a different way, not to the lesson, but to the presence of someone who made the world feel subtly, urgently alive. Over the next few days, the classroom became a stage for a subtle game neither of them openly acknowledged. The teacher's presence was still magnetic, but now, each interaction carried a faint undercurrent of playfulness, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface. He was hyper-aware of every glance, every word, every incidental brush of her hand. It started small. A corrected sentence in his assignment, delivered with her signature poised confidence. "You might want to rethink this phrasing," she said, her eyes locking briefly with his. It wasn't a reprimand. It was an invitation, though he didn't fully understand to what. He felt a flutter in his chest, a warming awareness that he couldn't quite name. On instinct, he responded with something slightly cheeky, just enough to test the waters without overstepping. Her lips quirked in the faintest smile, imperceptible to anyone else, but it made his heartbeat stutter. Then came the moments in shared spaces, the library, the hallway, the study corner where a few stragglers lingered after class. He noticed how she would lean over to examine his notes, her hair brushing against his shoulder, ever so lightly. A shiver ran up his spine, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he found himself lingering, letting her presence wash over him, catching the warmth and subtle scent of her perfume, which clung delicately to the space around her. Every accidental touch felt deliberate in its intimacy, though both acted as if nothing unusual were occurring. Their dialogue became a dance. She would make a pointed comment, lightly teasing, and he would counter with a remark that was just daring enough to elicit the smallest spark of amusement. "Lower your voice next time," she chided once, and he couldn't resist the playful reply. "Then maybe you should raise your heartbeat." It was bold, yet carefully measured, and her reaction, a nearly imperceptible lift of the eyebrows, a softening of her gaze, was enough to send his pulse racing. He also began noticing subtler signs, how she adjusted her scarf when she noticed him watching, the way her posture softened when she explained something directly to him, her fingers grazing the edge of his notebook as she passed it back. There was a rhythm to these interactions, a silent acknowledgement of a growing connection that was equal parts curiosity and restraint. He caught himself imagining scenarios he knew he shouldn't: casual proximity, shared laughter, quiet conversations outside class. And yet, even as excitement bubbled under his skin, he also felt a twinge of hesitation, a reminder of the invisible boundaries between them, of the age difference, of the unspoken propriety that both were aware of. That awareness only made the moments sharper, more poignant. By the end of the week, the classroom felt charged. Ordinary activities, a discussion, a group exercise, passing papers, were infused with the tension of the unspoken. Both of them were playing a game of subtle signals, testing boundaries, feeling the thrill of proximity without needing to verbalize it. For him, every glance, every brush of her hand, every faint smile was a small victory and a sweet torment all at once. In these quiet, charged moments, he realized that this connection was no longer accidental. It had become a private thread weaving through his days, a delicate, exhilarating tension that made ordinary interactions feel alive with possibility. And though neither dared to name it aloud, the slow, simmering attraction was impossible to ignore. It was a rainy afternoon when the classroom felt different, quieter, warmer, almost cocooned in the soft patter of raindrops against the windows. He had stayed behind to organize his notes, unaware that she lingered too, her own work spread across the table. The air carried the faint scent of wet earth mingled with the subtle aroma of her perfume, and the simple act of her presence made his chest tighten in an unfamiliar, thrilling way. She looked up from her papers and smiled, a small, almost shy gesture that hinted at something beneath her usual poised exterior. "I used to struggle with this, too," she said quietly, her tone softer than usual, as if confiding a secret she rarely shared. He looked at her, intrigued, sensing the rare vulnerability in her voice. It wasn't often that she let her guard down, and for some reason, sharing this small admission with him felt significant, almost intimate. He responded carefully, choosing words that conveyed understanding and warmth. "I think everyone struggles with it at first," he said, his voice steady, though he felt a flutter of nervous excitement. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes lingering on him longer than necessary, and for a moment, he became acutely aware of the way her eyelashes cast faint shadows across her cheeks. The world outside, the rain, the empty classroom, faded, leaving only the quiet space between them. Their hands brushed as she passed him a notebook. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a subtle shiver through him, a reminder of the unspoken connection building between them. He noticed how her fingers lingered just a fraction longer than needed, the warmth of her touch grounding him in the moment. He tried to focus on the notes in front of him, but his awareness kept drifting back to her, the gentle cadence of her breathing, the way she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the softness in her gaze when she caught him staring. She laughed lightly at something he said, a sound that was quiet but resonant, filling the empty room like a delicate chord. The laugh carried no pretense, no performance, just a moment of honest connection. And he found himself leaning just a little closer, his shoulder brushing against hers, feeling the warmth radiate from her body. The closeness wasn't forced. It was a natural, unspoken intimacy, the kind that makes time seem to stretch and the world outside cease to exist. In that brief span, he realized how much he was learning about her beyond the polished, confident exterior she presented to everyone else. There was a softness, a quiet vulnerability, a human fragility that made him want to protect her, to be near her, to understand her more deeply. And he sensed that she, in turn, felt safe enough to reveal these cracks in her carefully composed self. As the rain continued to fall, he noticed his heartbeat, steady yet quickened by proximity, by attention, by the tiny unspoken gestures between them. Their shared silence spoke volumes, a mutual recognition of something tender and fleeting, yet undeniably real. In that quiet, charged space, the slow burn attraction grew stronger, rooted not only in curiosity or playful tension but in the profound intimacy of understanding and being understood. By the time they left the classroom, both carried with them the unspoken awareness that their connection had shifted. What had begun as fascination was now deepening into something more profound, a fragile, beautiful bond built on shared vulnerability, subtle touches, and the quiet acknowledgement of hearts beginning to notice one another. The days after their quiet moment in the classroom carried a new weight, an unspoken awareness that neither could ignore. They began encountering each other in spaces outside formal lessons, the library, the quiet study corner, even the hallway between classes. Each shared space felt different, charged with an energy that was impossible to name. In the library, he found himself lingering near the same shelves where she often worked. The scent of old books mixed with her familiar perfume, and it tugged at something inside him, an almost dizzying awareness of her presence. She would lean over a table to examine a text, and when their shoulders brushed, just briefly, it felt electric, though neither spoke of it aloud. It was a touch that was accidental on the surface but deliberate in feeling, a quiet acknowledgement of closeness without words. They began to synchronize in small ways. When moving down narrow aisles, he'd instinctively step closer, careful not to crowd her, feeling the warmth of her passing. She would glance at him and offer a faint, knowing smile, subtle yet loaded with meaning. Their interactions were careful dances, a give and take of proximity that left him both exhilarated and slightly nervous. Every accidental touch, a hand brushing a shoulder, their fingers grazing while reaching for the same book, was magnified in his awareness. Even simple gestures carried weight. He noticed how she tucked her hair behind her ear when speaking to him, how her gaze lingered just a fraction longer when she asked for his opinion on a passage. They shared jokes, small moments of laughter that made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar warmth. And when they laughed, the sound echoed softly through the quiet library, a private resonance that felt intimate, almost sacred. In hallways or empty classrooms, the dynamic shifted subtly. They walked side by side, their steps unconsciously matching, occasionally letting their arms brush. Each accidental closeness sent small shocks of awareness through him, a reminder that he was navigating a delicate line between fascination and propriety. He caught himself imagining what it would feel like to let the hand linger just a second longer, to lean closer while sharing a private thought. But he restrained himself, knowing the tension itself was part of the thrill. Their conversations, too, had taken on a new rhythm. Words were layered with double meanings, teasing remarks that hinted at deeper interests but allowed plausible deniability. She would comment on his notes, his phrasing, his focus, and he found subtle ways to reply, weaving in humor and slight daring, testing boundaries without overtly crossing them. Each glance, each pause, each brush of a hand became a language of its own, unspoken yet understood. By the end of these days, the shared spaces had become a kind of private stage, a place where ordinary activities were transformed by the undercurrent of emotion between them. The slow-burn tension was no longer just a fleeting thought, it had become a persistent hum in the background of his day, a quiet anticipation he carried with him. And though they were careful to maintain decorum, to respect the boundaries imposed by age and circumstance, every glance, every touch, every shared laugh drew them closer, inch by careful inch. In this delicate, charged balance, he began to realize that the thrill was not just in being near her, but in the subtle intimacy that grew with each accidental touch, each meaningful look, and every shared space that allowed them to exist in close proximity without needing to speak their hearts aloud. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the day. He had stayed behind in the nearly empty classroom, organizing notes, when she appeared at the doorway, holding a stack of papers. There was no urgency in her movements, only the quiet grace he had come to notice, a calm, measured confidence that seemed to fill the room without demanding attention. "You're still here?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying a warmth that made him momentarily forget how to speak. He looked up, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, it felt as if the room itself had fallen away. There was no one else, no background noise, just the two of them and the subtle tension that had been building between them for weeks. She set the papers down on a desk nearby, and as she bent to adjust a stack, their hands brushed. The contact was fleeting, yet it sent a ripple through him, a sharp reminder of how alive he felt in her presence. She glanced at him, her eyes catching his in a moment that seemed to stretch infinitely. He noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint rhythm of her heartbeat, the warmth radiating from her hand that had touched his. "I thought you might need these," she said, her voice slightly lighter than usual, almost teasing. He accepted the papers, his fingers briefly touching hers again. Each contact was electric, yet carefully contained, a silent conversation that neither needed to put into words. For a moment, silence hung between them, charged and heavy. He wanted to speak, to bridge the distance, but words felt inadequate. So he let his presence speak instead, leaning slightly closer as he placed the papers down. Her gaze followed, softening as she noticed the subtle shift, the unspoken willingness to be nearer, to share this private space. "Lower your voice," she murmured playfully, recalling a line from one of their earlier exchanges. He smirked, heart racing, and whispered back, "Then raise your heartbeat." The words hung in the air, audacious but gentle, teasing yet tender. He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, followed by a soft laugh, a sound so intimate, it made his chest ache with warmth. Their shoulders brushed as they rearranged papers together, a touch that lingered slightly longer than necessary, intentional yet innocent. He could feel the heat of her body near his, the subtle scent of her perfume mixing with the quiet stillness of the classroom. Every gesture, every glance, every small movement became a language of its own, a dialogue of unspoken longing and mutual recognition. For the first time, the distance between curiosity and desire felt tangible. Both were aware of it, the thrill of being near, the racing pulse, the subtle tremor in their hands. But neither crossed the line of propriety. Instead, they allowed the tension to exist in its fullest form, savoring the delicate balance of intimacy and restraint. By the time she left, he was left with the echo of her presence, her warmth lingering in the space, the memory of her touch pressing softly against his skin, and the undeniable realization that what had been a quiet fascination was now a full, simmering attraction. Their connection had shifted. The playful tension had become something more profound, a heartbeat shared silently across a room filled with words left unspoken. After that evening, the rhythm of their interactions shifted subtly. Every glance, every touch, every shared joke now carried the weight of their unspoken connection. Yet beneath the thrill of attraction, a quiet tension began to creep in, wrapped in hesitation and reflection. He found himself replaying every interaction in his mind, analyzing the brush of her hand, the way her eyes lingered on him, the softness of her smile. Each memory sparked warmth, but also doubt. Could he allow himself to feel this so freely? Was it right to be drawn to someone older, someone entrusted with guidance, someone whose life experience dwarfed his own? The questions gnawed at him, even as the pull toward her remained irresistible. Meanwhile, she too was navigating her own internal maze. She valued her composure, her careful professionalism, yet the steady pull toward him had become impossible to ignore. She found herself noticing the tilt of his head when he listened, the subtle way he leaned in when intrigued, the quiet sincerity in his laughter. And every time he brushed against her, whether accidentally or intentionally, her heart betrayed her usual poise, thumping faster in a mixture of delight and uncertainty. They shared moments that were innocent yet charged with emotion, walking down empty corridors side by side, shoulders brushing ever so lightly, sitting across from each other in the library, fingers occasionally grazing while reaching for the same book, exchanging quiet, knowing smiles across the classroom. Each instance reinforced the attraction, but also the awareness of boundaries. The thrill of proximity now carried a layer of anxiety, the tension between desire and decorum. He would pause outside the classroom, replaying her words in his mind, the double meanings hidden in casual remarks. "Raise your heartbeat," he whispered to himself, recalling that playful exchange, feeling the warmth of her presence linger even when she wasn't there. He wanted to step closer, to voice what he felt, yet a cautious part of him hesitated, fearing the implications, the social norms, the fragility of what they had built. She, too, wrestled with restraint. Her gaze often lingered just a moment too long, her hand brushed his accidentally, or so she told herself, but she feared stepping too far, afraid of judgment or misunderstanding. Yet, she couldn't deny the quiet joy she felt in these moments, the flutter of excitement when he responded to her teasing, the comfort of sharing space with someone who noticed her, truly noticed her. These hesitations didn't weaken their connection, they sharpened it. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared silence became more significant. The slow burn of attraction was no longer just about curiosity. It had evolved into an emotional intimacy that neither could fully articulate. The tension simmered, delicate and consuming, a constant reminder that their hearts were already entwined in subtle, unspoken ways. By the end of this part, both were acutely aware of what they felt, yet neither acted impulsively. They were suspended in a space of why the late afternoon sun spilled across the classroom floor, painting everything in soft, golden hues. He arrived early, carrying a notebook and a quiet sense of anticipation. She was already there, arranging papers on a desk near the window. The room smelled faintly of books and sunlight, but now it carried an added warmth, a sense of shared understanding that hadn't been there before. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither spoke. Instead, they shared a quiet recognition of the journey that had brought them here, the teasing exchanges, the accidental touches, the moments of vulnerability, and the slow accumulation of mutual awareness. Each glance was a conversation in itself, filled with unspoken gratitude, curiosity, and an acknowledgement of the tension that had simmered for weeks. She smiled, a small, gentle curve of her lips that made his chest tighten pleasantly. "I see you've kept up with your notes," she said, her tone light, almost playful. He returned her smile, feeling the warmth of her presence radiating across the table as he settled into his seat opposite her. Their shoulders brushed subtly as they exchanged papers, and it was no longer accidental. It was comfortable, deliberate, and reassuring. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their actions creating a quiet harmony. The brush of hands as they reached for the same notebook, the occasional lean to glance at a passage, the soft murmur of shared laughter, all of it felt intimate without needing to cross any boundaries. He noticed the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the sunlight, and the slight tilt of her head when she was genuinely curious about something he had written. Each detail was magnified, not in obsession, but in appreciation. There were no bold confessions tonight, no dramatic declarations. Instead, the connection between them unfolded naturally, tenderly. He felt her trust, her comfort in his presence, and she felt the sincerity of his attention, the quiet steadiness of his care. When their fingers brushed over a page, neither flinched. The contact lingered just enough to acknowledge the shared closeness without needing words. They laughed softly over a small, private joke, and he noticed her eyes crinkle at the corners, a subtle sign of her vulnerability and warmth. In that moment, he realized that the slow-burn tension that had filled weeks of hesitation had transformed into something deeper, a steady, mutual affection that could coexist with respect and propriety. Their connection was no longer just about longing or curiosity. It was about companionship, understanding, and the quiet joy of being truly seen by another person. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the floor, she packed her things and paused by the door. He met her gaze, and this time, the look carried no hesitation, only acknowledgement. A gentle smile passed between them, soft and lingering, before she left the room. He stayed behind for a moment, feeling the echo of her presence, the warmth of her touch lingering in memory. That evening, They walked away with hearts lighter, carrying the certainty that their connection was real, respected, and cherished. The playful tension had matured into something lasting, a tender, age-appropriate romance rooted in understanding, trust, and subtle affection. The story, which had begun with teasing glances and whispered exchanges, ended with a quiet fulfillment, hearts aligned, boundaries respected, and a bond that promised warmth without needing to be shouted aloud. In the ordinary quiet of a sunlit classroom, their hearts had found each other, and that, in its simplicity and depth, was everything. Earning and restraint, each reflection deepening the connection, each hesitation making the eventual union, when it came, feel earned, fragile, and infinitely satisfying. The story had reached a crucial juncture. The slow burn was glowing brightest just before the warmth of realization and acceptance. 13.